So I think we should get started. Thank you all for joining today. I'm Phil Caruso. I head up demand generation at Sakon, and we appreciate your coming in to see our webinar on key elements of a successful TEM program. The genesis of this was a couple months ago. AOTMP released a State of the Telecom Management Industry report, and I really thought that they had a lot of great insights in that report, and I wanted to share them with some of the folks that we work with here at Sakon. So we've asked them to join us for this webinar today. Before we get started and I introduce our speakers, I just need to get some of the logistics and basic housekeeping out of the way. Everyone is muted during this, so we will be taking questions via chat. We're going to hold the questions to the end, but you are able to chat them throughout the session, and I will be collecting them and getting them all organized for the end of the session. Other than that, we will be sending a replay, so if you've missed anything or you have to get up and take a call or something, we will be sending out a replay of this to you all so that you will be able to get that. And I think that's all that we have. Other than that, please silence your cell phones, no eating, drinking, or flash photography, and we can get going on the webinar. The two folks that we have today that are going to be conducting the webinar, one is Arthur Papanastasiou. Arthur is our platform evangelist here at Sakon. He's an expert on the Sakon platform, and he also has several years of experience in technology expense management and mobility managed services. And from AOTMP, we're delighted to have Tim Colwell. Tim is really an expert's expert. He is the man, the architect behind AOTMP's Efficiency First framework. Efficiency First is a set of standards for both organizations, individuals, and TEM vendors for best practices in managing technology expense. We know that it's a rigorous program because we're in the process of finishing it ourselves here at Sakon. So it is a really great framework for managing, the process elements around properly managing your telecom ecosystem. So with that, Arthur, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Very excited to hear what Tim is going to present, and hope you enjoy it too.
And Tim, welcome to you as well. Why don't we start by, Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about AOTMP? Tim, are you talking?
Sorry, Tim, your mic might be muted.
Tim, are you back with us?
I'm hoping I am back with you. Can you hear me?
You are. Yeah.
You know, I've always been a big fan of a dramatic entrance. So apparently, reboot and try again was my MO. So I'm now back with the plan. I appreciate everybody's patience, and
No
it just goes to show that we're live and we're cooking with gas here. So perfect. Well,
Welcome,
again, thanks for everybody's patience as we work through the technical issue there. I was sharing that AOTMP Research is a global information research and advisory firm. We focus on 9 different practice areas that are all targeted towards helping organizations gain maximum benefit from telecom technology and other services that can help drive business results. Today, we're here to talk specifically about 4 key elements to delivering a successful TEM program. So without any further ado, we'll just jump right in. There are 4 different elements that we want to talk about today, and all of this came out of our State of the Industry report. The State of the Telecom Management Industry report, we collected data from enterprises just like you to understand where there are challenges, where there are opportunities, what's going well, what could be changed. And there were 4 themes that we'd like to address today that are really relevant to defining what's going on in the telecom management industry today and where things stand. So one is around inventory and having an accurate inventory, and we'll talk a bit about that. Not just where the challenges are, I think everybody's aware of that, but where some opportunities to create uplift and impact are. Unified work streams and breaking down the silos of telecom management operations is a second initiative. Integrating business systems so that data exchange can occur, and then ultimately having the KPIs, metrics, and performance dashboards that are needed. These are the four key elements that we've identified as being relative to driving top performance in your telecom expense management program. So with that, and just as a foundation, so we can take a look at, so we have a little bit of an understanding, rather, of where the data came from. AOTMP collected information from nearly 280 companies across 23 different industry verticals, and this information was then analyzed and aggregated so that we could have a good understanding of what's going on in the telecom management industry today. If you take a look at the company revenue and the job titles, this gives you some reasonable demographics as to who the respondents were. So 2/3 were $1 billion plus companies, and then some were, the other third was below $1 billion in revenue. You'll see that we have a lot of directors, managers, those that can influence change and results in the organization, as well as staff, and then of course executives. So we had quite a deep feedback loop from enterprises, and this was a global study, so it was conducted across not just North America, but also other rest of world entities. So with that, point number one that we want to drill in on here and talk about a bit is inventory. And as the title suggests to the slide, it is the fulcrum of telecom management results. Inventory in and of itself will determine whether or not your telecom expense management program is as effective as it could be in your organization, and whether it is fully optimized. And so I like to say that the tide of value that telecom expense management can deliver really hinges upon inventory and inventory accuracy. And what we discovered in this study, which I don't think should be a surprise to anybody today, is that there still is a struggle to maintaining an accurate inventory. And the genesis of this really comes about from a couple of different facts. And the first one is that inventory can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There certainly is billing inventory that's generated from invoices, from carrier invoices and the like. There's also physical inventory, assets and different things that may be deployed, handsets, devices, equipment, and the like that could be deployed. And then there's also all of the different components or attributes of inventory that help an organization say this component is right or wrong, or whatever the disposition is. There are folks that look at inventory purely from a billing perspective. There are other folks that look at it from a physical perspective. There are other folks that even dig into, I'll say, the configuration of those inventory elements. And so there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of source data. And the fun part about this is that inventory is also a point-in-time reference. So if, for example, you're utilizing invoices to capture an accumulated inventory, that's information about what happened in the past, right? If you're using physical inventories, that's information about what you observe and notice today, but it may not necessarily be true moving forward. So change and time are the two factors that really drive a lot of the struggle here. The other thing that we found in this research is that just over half of the organizations that participated in the State of the Industry study indicated that they are using multiple systems and multiple data sources to compile the inventory. So inventory doesn't become a monolith. It's not necessarily this single thing in a lot of organizations, and that presents some challenges, when trying to maintain accuracy and use that moving forward. And I think the call to action here is, when thinking about inventory, it's really reversing the or shrinking the 56% of the pie here, and saying even if there are multiple sources of data and information that's contributing to an inventory, how does that get into the proverbial single pane of glass? How does that get into an environment in which you can have a high level of confidence across and visibility across a great amount of information within your telecom estate? So in thinking about how to optimize just the management of inventory overall, there are four key things that I'd like to call out. And the first one is consolidate, consolidate, consolidate. And I think the thing to think about here when consolidating is that doesn't necessarily mean that there needs to be just one system. But it does mean that there needs to be a system that aggregates all of the information across the environment into a single view. The more fragmented the data, the more disparate the data, the less intelligence can be gleaned from that, and the less manageable it becomes. So in thinking about your entire telecom and mobility estate and all of the asset services and elements that make that up and the dispositions of it, bringing that information into a single view or aggregating it into a single view gives you a tremendous amount of power for lifecycle management and decision making. The other thing is that inventory is a very fluid element of telecom management, and it really begins with the order, right? Or the intent to order, or even maybe at that point, right? So often when thinking about opportunities to improve inventory accuracy, inventory manageability, the goal is, or the recommendation is, think about where things start, and that's the MACD process. And as we all know, there is no such thing as a perfect order, right? There may be many, many perfect orders that are placed for a service, and then it's installed, and then it's added to inventory, and then it's maintained until ultimately it's retired. But there's a lot of moving parts. Things can change with orders, quantities can change, things could be decommissioned even before they're installed. I mean, there's just a lot of moving parts. So evaluate and document the process that gets everything moving, and then that will set you up for success in maintaining inventory moving forward. The other element and aspect of this, which is closely related to service ordering and MACD processes, is really that contract service catalog, understanding all of the buying instruments that are associated with the goods and services that you'll be buying from vendors. And this could be carriers or hardware providers or whatever it may be. The reason for bringing that together is that contracts become a tool of truth, a tool of divining truth, when not only ordering services, but also when evaluating one degree of accuracy when they're in inventory. And that is it what I think it is? Is it billed by the right vendor? Is it financially accurate? So that's one aspect of the whole process. And by having all of the contracts in a centralized location that are part and parcel of the overall inventory, you have an opportunity then to cross-reference information and manage the financial life cycle of it. And then just streamline the procurement process overall. While MACDs are kind of service orders or point of transaction type activities, thinking about things like order approvals, engineering that may need to occur, other budgeting approvals, all the other aspects that ultimately feed the onset of inventory, those become great. When those are, I'll say, optimized, that gives you the opportunity then to elevate your ability to maintain inventory and keep it accurate. So with that, I'd like to kick it off to Arthur, and I'd like for you to share, Arthur, Sakon's views on these optimization opportunities and really your philosophy around managing inventory as a whole.
Thank you, Tim. Excellent points. For us at Sakon, it's all about having a complete cost-based and location-based inventory. What we're showing on this slide is a set of integrated applications that come out of our Synkronize system of record that we build. It's your inventory, but it's a lot more. So this is such a critical success factor for our customers that we actually devote a disproportionate amount of focus and effort on building the inventory and then in using it to enhance the results that enterprises and companies really want and need, in all these other areas. So when you have a great inventory in a single view, which is our primary focus when we implement, you're setting your company up for successful management and transformation of the network, as well as in managing, mobility programs and your cloud SaaS applications, subscriptions, and so on, managing all that well. And, the Synkronize system will consolidate and unify and verify and correctly associate the right data points across all your assets and services. This is an outgrowth of having a good inventory and then having all these other data sources in the one system. We also try to automate MACD procedures to improve the inventory's accuracy. This varies from company to company, of course, but it's another area of focus as we bring a new customer on. And in terms of the vendor contracts, there's a contracts module, which is much more than just a place to upload the PDF. We actually use the data within the contract, the rates. Everyone has seen that table on that one page in their vendor contract of what you're supposed to pay. That's loaded into the system. And so we do aggregate all the vendor contracts into a centralized repository. And generally, the people who are at our clients who manage the contracts really enjoy that part of the system because never do they have to look for anything again. It's all right there, including the basic alerting functions, but much more about the sub-account and account billing structure and other details about the accounts, about the contracts, pardon me. And then lastly, you mentioned about the procurement process. This is another, I think, overlooked area by most companies. There's a lot more to be gained here with a little focus. You're right. If there's any engineering to do, if there's any streamlining or any, sometimes it's as simple as you want to limit what someone who's authorized to create a request or an order to limit the vendors that they can choose from and the services that they can order from these vendors based on their location or their role. And these are the kinds of practical things that we address in the system. And so you'll find that streamlining the procurement process, you'll be able to, govern price, govern policy, put controls in place. And it's another thing that can keep your inventory far more accurate because it is sort of a fluid element. It's, as I always say, you're bringing things on and turning things down and things are moving up, down, and sideways all the time. So you really have to track all of those changes and have an efficient way to do it. And now for the part everyone really loves is that, everyone's interested in reducing expense and so on. And so the way that this is utilized is every month we take this wonderful inventory and all this contract detail and we use it. It's very useful to audit and validate all the charges on all the invoices. And this too helps to validate inventory and keep it current. So I know that, inventory is not as exciting as, how can you help us with our bills and so on. But the focus we find, the best way to reduce costs and get controls around the invoice side is not with a focus on invoicing. It's with a good focus on process and sourcing and inventory. And that's our philosophy.
And I think that serves very well what organizations are trying to accomplish. It's meeting not just the goals of those elements, it's also meeting the goals of managing the entire life cycle of the environment. And one of the other, or the second finding, and one of the other things that I wanted to point out here is that often within managing a telecom environment, there are a lot of different work streams which create a lot of different realities, and it's realities of different data, different perspectives, and in some cases even different value propositions for the data that may be generated out of an inventory that may be gleaned. And one of the second findings that we had in this study is that there's a lot of inconsistency or amongst processes. And so as the statement indicates, inconsistent and ineffective processes are really handicapping the enterprises. Now, to provide some balance to this, I don't think that any organization, full willing sets out and says, hey, let's develop some ineffective processes. Nobody ever does that. I mean, that's not the goal. But I think what happens is, if you take a look, for example, at 30 prescribed telecom management activities, and by way of context, as was mentioned in the introduction, the Efficiency First Framework is AOTMP's methodology for enterprises for enterprise to manage a fixed and mobile telecom environment. And we prescribe 30 different telecom management activities that not just are individual work streams, but they operate in harmony with one another to, for full effect. So as you start to look at these 30 activities and think about your own organization and what's involved, for example, in just any one of these, you're going to pretty quickly start to realize that there's probably a lot of matrix in the environment and in the workflow to bring things together. And when thinking specifically about inventory, and this is not exclusive, but just kind of calling out some of the activities that we've already talked about. Inventory is, managing assets and services. We've mentioned the contract management part. Help desk, invoice processing becomes not only a payment mechanism, but also a reconciliation process, right? Use inventory to validate that what you're being billed is what it should be. And then you get into, device management and the service ordering and procurement. These could all be different work streams within a given organization. And what we find is that there's a lot of specialization with these different activities, both maintaining or establishing and then maintaining. But then the challenge comes into integrating all of these together. So the thought here around this realization that even today, even with the tools and technology that's available there needs to be a concerted effort on automating and streamlining and integrating the different workflows so that the data that makes up inventory and the data that's used to manage the environment is contiguous across the board. And I would even use those 30 activities almost as a divining rod to identify where you might need to look in your organization to identify where there's a work stream that's either upstream or downstream or across other work streams to identify where there's opportunities to integrate. So to that end, evaluating and documenting the different activity workflow could be a very beneficial exercise. And what I find is, individual operators, they know what they're doing, right? And they're the experts. They're SMEs at what they do. They do it all day long. But what I find is by having sessions where you're kind of evaluating the workflow in aggregate, you learn that, for example, if I'm in one work stream, the exercise of evaluating it may help you if you're upstream or downstream from me, right? So it opens up a line of communications and gives you opportunities to synchronize those processes. And then, when thinking about specifically as a callback here to service ordering, making sure that service catalogs are unified and streamlined. It's not unusual in organizations that there are different service catalogs for different service types. Maybe it's, infrastructure, desktop, and then mobile, or, some other configuration. But making sure that there's a consolidated view of that gives you a huge opportunity to, as Arthur said, manage the data that you have to make the right decisions, right? And this all feeds inventory as well. So with that, Arthur, could you reflect on those observations and talk a bit about how Sakon manages workflow and what your thoughts are around that?
Sure. So the idea here is that every enterprise is unique in what they need, how they run today, how they might modify things to be better, and during implementation, as a normal part of what we do, we actually take a very deep dive into the customer's use cases and needs, and we'll conduct, workshops in particular areas to specifically address these things. First of all, we'll document the current state, and this, again, this sounds a little basic, but there are, there's ways to do this well, and then there's ways to do this really well. And so, we'll document the current state. Usually there's workflows in place for, things like invoice processing, mobility ordering, fixed line ordering, maybe help desk. And what we'll try to do is really fully understand those processes as they operate today. And this plays to, we really want to learn our customers' business in order to best make recommendations, even down to, how they handle exceptions in all of these processes. And so then knowing this, we'll make suggestions how to best unify and streamline and tailor the future state workflows. And they truly are unique for every enterprise, and it's one of the more exciting parts of an implementation. But we put a lot of effort into this and in getting this right, so that in order to do it, we really have to have a consultative approach to how we implement. And so here's an example of we have some fixed line ordering. We have in the second image, we have some order types for mobility ordering, and these workflows are tailored to meet the needs of each customer. And again, the mobility process yielding sort of like a, you've ordered things online, you're putting things in a catalog, in a shopping cart, and you're making the appropriate selections. And we have to know, based on the needs of the enterprise, which data points and elements to validate against and to open up to the end user community or not offer to the end users, and so on. But you can deploy the system all the way out to the end user community if you wanted to distribute the work away from, sometimes the admins are overburdened. If there's any admins on the line, let us know in the chat if it's just too much. The volume of things to manage is just so much. And so with Sakon, you can deploy it out to line managers or site admins, or even out to the end user community. It fully supports single sign-on and so on. And so in doing all of this workflow discovery and design, and then recommending better streamlined processes, it helps our customers get the right results.
Thanks, Arthur. The third point that we wanted to talk about here is really an extension of the workflow and of the inventory, and it's about dividing truth from multiple systems and data sources. And so one of the perspectives to look at here, or questions to ask, I guess, is, what is the truth? And often when you're dealing with multiple data sources, truth can be either very cut and dried, or it could be very subjective, or it could be very contextual. And so in using this narrative really as a building block, thinking about the different workflows as we had just talked about, all of the cross-departmental workflows can lead to challenges with process improvement, challenges with I'll say, knowing what the truthful data is that's generated throughout the process. So we find that this is still relatively common today. Now, an interesting point about this is we wanted to know why, and I think that as we pointed out, or as we identified that this still was a persistent challenge, we then had the question, well, what's causing this? What's the root cause, and how do we fix it, right? So as often I have been told, my new favorite phrase, let's not admire the problem, let's resolve the problem, right? I think that there's a lot of folks that recognize that that there are these challenges, but now we want to talk about what to do with it. Well, the big inhibitor that we identified is that there weren't a lot of resources available to organizations to improve the processes, improve data integrity. It wasn't for lack of want, it was for lack of resources. And to that end, we identified something that I think is kind of interesting. 69% of organizations say that one of their top priorities was improving workflow, improving efficiency, so that it could lead to, more efficient operations, more integrity in the data, so on and so forth. So, with this, what we really uncovered is that while there is a challenge to overcome here, there's a lot of focus being put on it. So, as a recommendation that we're offering to any organization is start with the basics in this particular process. So things like identifying all the data sources, and that may seem like a very basic thought, but I was recently talking to an enterprise client, and they had this aha moment realization when they were thinking about their their financial systems, and it turns out that they not only had 3 different systems, but they had multiple different versions of those systems across the globe, right? And so even just identifying that from an AP perspective was kind of a challenge, and every door they opened, they found something new. But going through the process and saying, where does data come from, and what's the source of the data, and how is this data being used, or how could it be used to either rationalize something with an inventory, make a sound decision, or analyze it from a BA perspective. Those are good things to think about. So think about all of the, financial systems, ordering systems, ticketing systems, service catalogs, even things that are that are technology driven but a little less formal, like intranets. We found, for example, situations where organizations have all sorts of data sources that basically are just files out on SharePoint or whatever their system may be. So kind of going through that process. And then, validate the data and understand what its particular truth is. And by this, I mean, evaluate what every data point means. So kind of a basic example that I think everybody can relate to is if you get a bill from a carrier and it says, here's a T1 line and it's $500 a month. There's a couple of truths there. The truth is that you have a bill for $500 a month. The truth is that they're billing you for a T1 line. The truth is that it was sent to you. I mean, those are all truths. Now, whether they're accurate or not, that becomes a whole different discussion. But you need to then marry that truth up with other truths that you identify and figure out the exceptions. So was the bill actually addressed to your organization? Is that a truth? Is it associated with a location that actually exists? Is that a truth? Is it associated with a contract? Is it associated with a business unit or a chargeback? And all of a sudden, we've got, you may have the bill, you may have your inventory, you may have your real estate list, you may have your people list, your personnel list. Sorry, I couldn't pull that off the top. Your personnel list. You may have all sorts of information that helps you build different versions or build the truths for each data source, but then being able to rationalize them together. And this really is an ongoing exercise that needs to occur. And the goal, of course, is to build a truth, right? And then aggregate and correlate data into a single view. And I think that's been a theme throughout. When all of this information can be pulled together, then you can make it fully informed or more informed decisions, because all these different components of truth then all of a sudden become a reality. And then you can make the decision whether it's accurate or inaccurate based upon your own business requirements and your business needs. So I'd be kind of interested, Arthur, if you could talk about how all of these different components become truth in Sakon's perspective.
Arthur, I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, and I just said all my best stuff too. Everyone missed it. Sorry about
Always,
that. So every enterprise has really a similar challenge. It's Tim, we see it on every single implementation. Data exists in silos, and so there's just so much going on in so many places that this data exists that it's a systemic issue, right? And so what we find is that there's only one way to deal with that. We think about it. You've got carrier contracts, carrier invoices, HR data, real estate site list data, financial data, equipment data. There's just so much going on that getting a really complete and actionable picture of a company's global network is extremely difficult. And so this, for everyone on the attending, my heart goes out to you. It is really challenging. And so what we've tried to do then is build into our process of how we set up the system and build into the software the ability to from resolve one of the very biggest hurdles in understanding and managing the company's network. This is a huge pain point for managing the inventory, managing the expenses. But the good news is that although many providers are focused on, invoice management, we've tackled the much harder task of, capturing and building the inventory, but also uniting it and associating it properly with all the other available data. This will enrich the inventory, and it'll guide the management and management of the inventory and the expenses, and increase the usefulness of the inventory. Above all, we want to put everything in one system, but we can't just make it, one system of chaos. It's got to be associated properly and be really useful. That's where all the benefits come from. And so if you would advance the slide, there's a lot of information here. The main idea here being that you have to pull everything together into one system. This is the way to tackle the massive challenge of data siloing. And if along the way you normalize the data, you organize the data, you validate it and verify it and connect it properly, associate the right data points together, you'll end up having the best possible system of record, the best possible. And that's the kind of a system that everybody sort of ends up being really invested in and keeping it current. IT loves what we build. Finance and the CFO, they will love the financial data that comes out of our system because it's really accurate and complete. The CIO, they love having such useful information. There's really not a lot of question of, if they want to perform a project or transform the network, what do we have, or where is it, who's responsible, what does it cost, where do we start? All those things are answered by that. Again, it's the theme of our program here today, but we're making a unified view of everything, and we're making it useful. So now you have it all in one place, and then a company can now go and do what they really want to do, with that data, which is, manage their communications network and transform the network better. So that's how we deal with it. Is our system of record, the software has been made so robust that it can do all the right things with the data, that it frees up people, right? People in the company's organizations, people in our organization, to then focus on the right things.
And I think that segues very, very well into into the final thought. So thinking about having the best system of record available, one of the areas that we explored in this research was really around KPIs, metrics, dashboards, reporting, things like that. The visualization and relationship of data. And I think a very interesting theme popped up, and that is that there was a want for visibility into more information from enterprises for managing the telecom estate. And the challenge was not so much the physical, I'll say the report or the dashboard or the visualization, but it really boiled down to not having good underlying data. And maybe, and good is kind of a subjective term, but maybe not having all of the information that's needed, or the information isn't correlated properly, or it's aged, or you're dealing with multiple segments of data over different time periods, right? So it's not bad data, it's just not the right data for the purpose. And so when thinking about how you use all this information, and even answering the more fundamental question, why do you want a good inventory? I would make the argument it's so that you can have data that you can use to manage your environment, make decisions, and report value. Report value to users, to the business, use it for vendor management practices, so on and so forth. And so the point really here is, when thinking about how to ensure and establish that you have underlying data that will support your business needs, you really have to start with the end in mind. You have to answer the question, if I want a report, if I want a dashboard, if I need a key performance indicator or some other measure, what do I need, right? What is that? And sometimes that's a very simple and straightforward answer. I need to know how much I paid my vendors last month. I need to know what a budget trending report is for spending with vendor X. I need to know service order quantity. You can kind of go down the list of a lot of operational things that have financial impact that you need. But when also kind of expanding a bit, and thinking a little bit more outside of those that manage telecom on a day-to-day basis and the exact user. Maybe thinking about different roles in the organization. What might a CFO or a COO want to see? Not necessarily just about telecom, but about how telecom is impacting their business. What does a line of business owner? What does the Western Regional Manufacturing Vice President care about as it relates to telecom? And the answer may be quite a bit of different things, maybe a lot of things, right? But if you know kind of what the end goal is, and you think broadly about different information and how you want to rationalize that, then that also gives you a great point of reference for ensuring that the underlying data is not only consolidated, but it's validated in a way in which it becomes usable. So this is kind of the general database thought, but I think that one of the areas of opportunity for telecom management overall is to have this I'll say top-down thinking and use this as a guide map, or as a roadmap rather, to guide them in their TEM practice, implementing their TEM practices and managing that moving forward. So the opportunities really are validate the source data and its relevancy and accuracy. And again, that may seem very obvious, but one of the challenges that is still very dominant in the industry today is data is only worth something if it's relatable to something, right? You can have mounds of information, but if you can't do anything with it, it's not very usable. So making sure that you've got the right data to draw the right conclusions so that you could support that, and again correlating that in a single source. And then think about different performance dashboards, and I often parse this idea using a couple of different parameters. But when thinking about telecom management, there are technical aspects and financial aspects and operational aspects and business aspects that matter. And understanding what different stakeholders want to be able to derive from their telecom expense management platform and program gives you some great tools to then begin to ensure that it's there and build that out. And then, track and measure business impacting KPIs. And, this is kind of an interesting one because, sometimes organizations, and I know we all have been through this, there's some stakeholder in a group and they have a request rather, and the request is around X, Y, or Z, and, we fulfill that demand, but then, close the loop, make sure that it's actually being used and it's fit for purpose tomorrow. Because, in today's technology or today's fast-paced environment and technology is changing and all of that, the measures and metrics that you had in place 6 months ago may not be completely relevant today for a particular audience member. So just being aware of that gives you an opportunity to not only engage with the business, but then to continually evolve and improve and optimize reporting and information that's fed back. And then, the other recommendation that comes out of this, as we heard from many organizations, is provide analysis and insight on the KPIs that you're providing back. And so kind of the point behind this is that sometimes folks ask for information, a report, a dashboard, whatever, you provide that information, but then there's that context that only the folks running telecom might be able to answer, right? Like, what does this mean to me? Like, really, okay, great. I have 20% more orders in iPhone 10s. I know that means a lot more money, but what does it mean to me in other business terms, right? So provide the insights, the commentary along with the KPIs, and that can go a long way in, selling the value of what you're doing and engaging with the rest of the organization. And I'd love, Arthur, for you to share with us, some of, Sakon's philosophies and viewpoints on, reporting and dashboards and, taking all this good data and making it, usable information.
Sure. So you're right. Beginning with the end in mind is like the only way to really do this well. You have to understand, what are executives and line managers going to need in order to do better, make better decisions, and so on. I've just included a couple of images from just a couple of dashboards in the system. One of the nice things about having so much granular data in the Synkronize system of record is that, you can do so much with it. And really at this point, no longer is the challenge just, can we produce good reports, right? The challenge is, how can we express the data exactly as you need it to make a good realization, get good insights, and then make a good business decision? And so, like, for example, on the fixed side of the house, if you wanted to see an inventory related, services related insight or collection of dashboard widgets, here's one that shows you a world map, and this thing goes full screen. You've got to see it. It's very impressive, where you can get right to the sites and get right to the inventory data, including the costs and so on, with just a couple of clicks. And then how would you like to be able to filter? These are interactive. They allow you, like if I click on closed sites, that little orange bar, and I would show you that there's 16 closed sites, and that would show you then the services that you're paying for at closed sites. Some of that might make sense if it was a POTS line for an alarm, but some of it might not make sense, right? And so we can show you these things really quickly and easily. And to be able to see your services by vendor, your breakdown by country, including the costs and so on and so on. There's just so much good data in here that, we have in the system a number of ways to get it out. It's standard reports. It's build your own reports. I mean, in the build your own, I have pivots, like Excel style pivots, where I can just put a few rows and columns together and get like a spend trend by vendor month over month in just a couple of clicks, right? So, it's really simple and easy to either use standard reports or build your own. There's a couple of different areas of dashboard functionality where you can create your own, or you can use the collections of insight widgets that we've put together. We know finance would be interested in our spend insight. We know invoice processors would be interested in certain other insights. And so, the idea though is that we've got the data and we've got the needs of the enterprise pretty much in the system in a way that allows the data to come out and be in a format and be usable, so that, again, quick decisions. Nobody really wants a report for the sake of having a report. Most folks want to get this information so that they can learn the answer to some challenging question. For example, if you advance this, I did another one here, like this one is fixed, but I did a mobility view. And the idea here is I've got a mobility dashboard that's filterable. With a click, I can look at voice, so this would be in minutes. Here it's by data, so it's in megabytes, or by messaging on the mobility side of the house. So I can come in here and with a click, I can put it on data, and then I can load the grid at the bottom, and I can click on the last column and look. If I want to know, look what's down there. I've got, I blocked out the users' names and their phone numbers for the sake of, those on the line who are, privacy concerns. We're aware of those and we're compliant and so on, but I wanted you to see that, here's a mobility view with the domestic usage, the international usage in megabytes. If this were voice, it would be the usage in minutes. So I've got usage and costs in one view, boom, right on the screen. And then all I did was click on the international usage, the very last column, and I've got my big international data spenders at the top of the list. So if every month you're managing mobility in-house or some other program at your company, and you have the same 2 or 3 questions every month, I wish I could, find this needle in this haystack made out of needles, right? You've got to find the answer to this thing, and it's challenging. If you have that today, based on coming onto the Sakon platform, what you should find is that it's very easy to manipulate and express the data to answer the particular question or challenge you have, get the answer, and then be able to move on. So quick and easy access to data and to reports and insights and to the answers you need is really what we've tried to build. And I think we've done a really solid job at it. Just 2 examples of probably 30 examples I could show you on the screen. And so, having the good data is powerful. Being able to express it well and empower you, the folks at the companies using Sakon, to go and do what you need to do, that's really the key. So we think we've addressed, KPI and data insights as well. And just looking at the clock, we've got a couple minutes to go. I want to bring Phil Caruso back on. Phil is the head of demand generation at Sakon, and he's been moderating the chat for us. Thank you, Phil. And thank you so much, Tim, for breaking down the study for us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Arthur and Tim. This was a great conversation. We've put the contact information up here for Tim and myself. Please feel free to reach out to us. And also, If you're interested in the AOTMP Efficiency First program, please go to their website and get some information. It's a great framework for helping you to better manage your technology expenses. And of course, you're always welcome to check out the Sakon site as well. Learn more about the Sakon platform. Now, if you'd like to put in some questions, we'll get started. Couple of first question that came in about the KPIs that you were just speaking about. Mm-hmm. What would you say are the top ones? What are the top KPIs or metrics that you need to really manage a TEM program?
I think, yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing is you need to have some KPIs that measure the efficiency or the intervals of different work streams. So things like service ordering, help desk, procure to pay cycles, inventory accuracy, reconciliation and exception cycles. I think from an operational perspective, you need to be able to measure, time and results there. But I think also from a business perspective, being able to illustrate back to I'll say the non-operational people, being able to illustrate back to the organization things that will help them understand what the value of time and money is as it relates to telecom. So for example, take mobile help desk. Here's a quick and easy one. Well, it's quick. No, I don't know if it's easy, but take mobile help desk. So if you can affect change in the amount of time that your users are spending either in break fix activity on a mobile device or in ordering a new device or activating or whatever the case is, that's time back to the resources that are in the organization. So if I'm a user out there, if you could illustrate, for example, that response time and closure time of tickets is done on the first call, and it used to be 5 minutes, now it's 2 minutes, or whatever the metrics are, there's value there. And so I think, thinking about really what the business owners and business units care about relative to how they interact with telecom, that's really the key to those types of metrics. So maybe that gives you a starter thought on that process.
And how do you know the data is accurate? How do you maintain data accuracy?
Yeah, that's a well, I'll start now, and in 15 years we'll know the answer. That's a big topic. That's right. A big topic. But I think there's a general data management philosophy that is very 101 basic, but I think it really works, right? And that is starting with documenting your assumptions, right? If you have a file, and we'll take something that relates to telecom. If you have like a personnel file, right? So you're assigning mobile assets to people. Let's say that's the exercise. So you start with a file, a list of names. They're in this and that and the other department. You got to start with an assumption that it's probably right. You just assume that it's right. But then document the assumptions as you go through that, right? And drill down. So maybe there's a situation in which there are employees that actually, from a cost perspective, hurdle several different departments or several different GLs. And, there are some exceptions always. And then there's the executive that has to have the 15 mobile devices because whatever, and all this. So start with assuming that something is accurate and then documenting all your assumptions and then using that as a roadmap to validate and pull in other data sources as you go. And it's a pretty basic process. It's not easy to do that. But the one key I would say is anytime you have a piece of data that you're assuming is right, document why you think it's right, what the assumptions were. And then you can continue to evolve and validate that. And, sometimes you'll find out that what you thought was perfect is far from it. And other times you'll be right on the mark. But at least you'll know why you made those assumptions. And then you can control the data, control the management of it moving forward. That'd be my best recommendation.
All right. We also had a question about, inventory and how do companies, what are you seeing that companies are doing to maintain an accurate inventory?
Yeah, I think the if we go back at least mentally here to really the first research finding I shared, I think that the key to maintaining an accurate inventory is managing the life cycle and understanding from the moment that something originates in inventory through the point in time in which it's decommissioned, and maybe even after it's decommissioned. You don't just delete it. Making sure that the processes there are succinct, making sure that all of the different validation points, and that's technical and financial validation points, not just one or the other. But I think going through and having a set of procedures so that you can validate along the way, that's probably the best course of action. And we see situations, for example, where inventory really is kind of snapshot in time, right? Was dealing with an organization not too long ago. They had 2,000 max a month. Well, my inventory from this morning is already a little bit off, right? I mean, that's just a lot of movement. So understand that it's a snapshot in time, but understand what all the change factors are and make sure that the processes are integrated. So if you've got one group that's just doing service ordering and there's no interlink between what they're doing and the folks that are validating inventory from billing or from physical site audits or whatever, there's going to be gaps. So make sure you have the processes soup to nuts aligned and integrated to the best of your ability, and that'll really set you on the right path.
Okay. Well, I see that we've just gone beyond the top of the hour. But I want to thank you all for attending today. We will be sending out a recording of this later in the week, and so you can expect that in your email. Reach out to us if you have any questions. And again, we thank you for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.